Hello everyone, welcome back to a very special video. I'm DTM as always, and with the CYL 6 units fast approaching, I thought it would be fun to do a tier list of all these past Brave heroes and see where they rank. This is something of an annual tradition at this point for the channel. I did one last year, and now it is the time to do one again. And let's see where I think these units currently rank in terms of the meta and the game. But as always, before we get into that, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that jazz to help support the channel. Only takes 5 seconds to subscribe, which really does help out this channel a lot. And I really do appreciate all this constant support. So to preface this, how I'm going to be basing my tier list is what value they provide and what reason or justification there is to use a particular unit versus other options. That is like the general framework that I'm working with. And I'm mainly going to be focusing on the 4 competitive modes that exist in FEH as of now. That being Arena, Aether Raids, Offense, Aether Raids Defense, and Summoner's Duels. So like S tier is basically there's no reason not to use this unit. A tier is basically like they might not be quote unquote optimal, or they might have some trade-offs, but there's still reason enough to use these in various game modes. B tier is generally not advised to use, but there is niche scenarios where you can justify using them or where they have value. And C is basically, there's really no reason to use these units, but you can if you want to. You can make them work if you want to. And then D is just like, please don't. Obviously, this is all very subjective and is my own personal opinion, so if you disagree with anything on this tier list, be sure to let me know down in the comments, respectfully of course. And yeah, let us discuss these Brave units, starting with Brave Ike. So Brave Ike and I have quite the history together. He was the first unit I've ever plus 10'd in the game, and he was my original AR carry, with the classic Brave Lucina support, of course. He definitely was one of the most powerful tanks due to his damage reduction at the time of his refine. Like 40% on the first hit and 80% on the second with that Forced Desperation was, and still kinda is, insane, especially when you stack speed on him with no follow-up. And especially with the recent new damage reduction skills like Spurn and more recently like Speed Smoke, you can definitely stack a lot of speed just by himself and stack even more damage reduction. I personally don't think that's really optimal. I think no follow-up is better, but I mean, it is an option. Unfortunately, we've gotten quite a lot of counterplay to damage reduction recently with things like Deadeye, Lethality. That has gotten pretty meta, and honestly, it was basically dual leaf. That unit was the one that severely hurt his viability, and we all know how widespread dual leaf became. Like, that Valentine's banner was probably by far the most meta impactful banner we've had, at least of the time I've been playing FEH. And in general, green right now is not the greatest color to be right now with all the powerful reds, especially when you consider Dual Chrom, one of the most meta impactful units we've gotten this year, with that Deadeye, enabling him to pierce through that damage reduction. He is still very tanky though, especially as like a raid boss in Summoner's Duels. You can support him with like Fallen Lilith and Legendary Eliwood in Summoner's Duels and run him as like that raid boss strategy. Unfortunately, I don't think raid bosses are that optimal of a strategy in Summoner's Duels, especially compared to other options like pick-based teams or full like rushdown Pathfinder teams. And I mean, properly supported, he can still carry, especially in AR Chaos season as a frontline supported by a far save. But again, like, there are units like Legendary Nana in both Aether Raids and Summoner's Duels, and Legendary Nana just completely ignores Brave Ike's damage reduction. I still think he's really good though, but definitely far from meta defining or optimal in any sense. But there are certain scenarios where I can see him working very well. It's just that there isn't as big of a place for him as there was previously. So definitely B tier as of now. Next, we have Brave Lyn, and Oh boy, Bravelyn. Alright, what can we say about Bravelyn? I mean, what can you say? While initially she was the best CYL unit pre-refine, post-refine, yeah. She struggles a lot and faces a lot of competition from other ranged calves. Like, she does have Sakai Blessing, but unfortunately that doesn't have Fire Sweep against beast units, which used to not matter, but nowadays it definitely does. Granted, as a ranged cav, you can always find a place for her, I guess. Like, you can run Fire Sweep, Poison Strike, but if you do that, then she's basically the same as any other bow cav out there in the game. And so, like, the only thing that you can make her stand out, or justify using her, is to use an inheritable bow with Sakai's Blessing. But, like, again, countering beasts actually matter now, so Bravelyn, unfortunately, is in a really poor spot, and I don't think this will be that controversial at all. I would put her into D tier. And I guess we are going to continue the strong streak with Brave Roy, and, well, like, I think someone at IS hates Roy. Like, before Eliwood's weapon revolution, he might have been decent, and even now, in a vacuum with, like, say, the safety fence, he would be good with Gale Force or Hit and Run, or on defense with, like, the Lunge Gale Force Eliwood set. But, I mean, there is a reason why I say Lunge Eliwood, right? Like, he is completely taken over by his father. There's no reason to use him over his father. Like, again, Brave Roy is a 5-star unit, and Eliwood is 4-star, and like, whatever stat difference there is between Brave Roy and Eliwood, it just doesn't matter enough, right? Like, Eliwoods you probably already have a bunch of, so if you want to use Brave Roy, like, Eliwood will just do fine, even without the Resplendent stats, and, I mean, yeah, there's literally no reason to use Brave Roy, like, at all, which is really sad. Thankfully, like, at least he has one good ult, which is his, Groom version, although that has gotten really competitive with all the axe calves, so yeah, IS just has a vendetta against Roy, I guess. Like, I don't know why they do this. But enough talking about units that have aged very poorly. Let's talk about a unit that means a lot to me personally, in case you can't tell. It is a Brave Lucina. And when she got her refine, I think it was like 3 years ago now. Oh my goodness. She was by far the best support unit in the game. Like, Drive Breath, it's still to this day an insanely strong support and an important support. Like, a lot of builds used to only work with Brave Lucina support. Like, builds that rely on being able to retaliate immediately with a special, like Brave Edelgard with Bonfire Mystic Boost. Of course, now there's a lot more competition for that support. We've gotten Flame or Element that provides damage reduction, which is a trade-off. Like, damage reduction is more defensive for less offensive power that accelerating specials can. And obviously units like New Year's Valoria and Summerhilda, and especially Thor, since Thor is a mythic and you don't have to give up a team slot for that World Breaker. So obviously she now faces a competition directly with her role. But the biggest one is the Breath Seals. Though, as you know, with the Breath Seals, you don't need an extra unit to get special acceleration. Units and carries can be self-sufficient by just having a Breath Seal. So that definitely made her lose a lot of uniqueness. However, I still say that there are still many scenarios where you would want to run Brave Lucina over those other options. For one, having Brave Lucina support instead of Breath Seal can open up the seal slot for either more stats or Mystic Boost, or the Deflect seals like Deflect Magic, which is really important these days with all the Brave tomes we've gotten. It just gives more options. And also, Brave Lucina can support flyers, calves, and physical ranged units, which can't use the Breath Seals. For instance, I've recently started using Hardy Fighter Brave Hector with Deflect Magic. Brave Lucina allows Aegis to always be procced whenever the enemy hits. So what will happen is that the enemy will attack Brave Hector, which will proc the Aegis. Hector will attack back, which because of the special acceleration will get Aegis procced again, and so when the enemy follow-up attacks, that follow-up attack will still be blocked by Aegis. And that is extremely strong in allowing Brave Hector to survive things like dual dagger. And also, Brave Lucina can support multiple units, unlike New Year's Valoria, who can only support her support partner. And she has her C slot free for other support, like the new Infantry No Follow-Up skill. So I actually think that skill increased Brave Lucina's value just a little, as units like Thor, who has the C filled in already with Worldbreaker, can't run that. Obviously, this is still a lot of competition, and in most scenarios, I don't think you would run Brave Lucina over Thor, especially in Astra season, where Thor is a mythic. But overall, I still say that she's a very strong support option and has enough reasons in her favor to justify using her over those other options. So I definitely say A tier. Better than Brave Ike, at the very least. And now we get into the CYL 2 units. We have Brave Hector. And Brave Hector. Well, I don't know how much I actually need to say. Since his refine like 2 years ago, he's still one of the best tanks in the entire game, and honestly one of the best units overall in the entire game. It's actually ridiculous that a nearly 2-year-old refine still makes him one of the best, if not the best. Null armor is especially so good, especially with dual chroms now everywhere. And the denying follow-up combines super well with Hardy Fighter to prevent follow-ups most times, so long as the enemy does not have no follow-up. And speaking of Hardy Fighter, that skill allows him to mitigate things like lethality or Deadeye. Inflicting -6 attack and defense in combat and neutralizing penalties is just a cherry on top. And yeah, I don't think it would be much of a surprise to say that Brave Hector's refine was really overtuned. Brave Hector is essentially a free win for A-Thrade's offense. Like, I used Brave Hector for the first time last Chaos season, and it was honestly disgusting. And I don't even have Flame, or Elamine, or any other damage reduction support. Like, I genuinely don't understand how Brave Hector would lose. And of course, in Summoner's duels, he is by far one of the most meta-relevant Far Savers. And it's not like IS didn't try to counter him, right? Why do you think we had so many good green units last year? From Legendary Male Byleth, Summer Sita, Summer Hinoka, Ninjorin, New Year's Dagger. And despite all of that, he is still the king. Honestly, that just goes to show how insane his refine is. Yeah, definitely S tier, no surprise at all. Next up, we have Brave Celica. And Brave Celica, with her refine, along with Double Lion, she can Gale Force extremely well. Her Brave effect in Double Lion, along with special acceleration in her weapon, and like a pulse effect after combat, enables that Gale Force to be procced very reliably. And this is very important for Gale Force, as reliability and consistency is probably the most important aspect for a Gale Force unit. And she can do like either that Gale Force sweep, or she can do hit and run, especially with a safety fence. However, I don't think she is particularly that good these days. The main issue is that she doesn't really fit well as an initiator. The healing in her weapon prevents her from being able to get into Wings of Mercy range and act as a Wings of Mercy beacon. You can't say like run Fury 4 on her A and the Fury Seal and be able to reliably get below that 50% HP threshold. And because of her Brave effect, that generally prevents the counterattacks from the enemy that could potentially put her into Wings of Mercy range. If you run her as a follow-up, which you can do, and she does pretty well, she then has to swap out Double Lion with Wings of Mercy, which obviously removes her Brave effect. There are ways to circumvent this, like with Ascendant Florina, but it is awkward to say the least. And I personally think there are a lot better initiators now, like Ninjorin or Summer Edelgard. However, I still think she is pretty strong, as Brave effect, special acceleration, and the pulse effect is really consistent, and you can work around her issues. There are some niche scenarios that you probably can use her in, so honestly, I'd put her in B tier. Next, we have Brave Ephraim. And Brave Ephraim is honestly a unit that I don't have much experience. He was pretty meh on release, and green armor immediately causes issues with his movement, pre-save skills, and there are definitely a lot of competitions in the green axe armor's archetype. His effect wasn't really that great and definitely didn't impact the meta, though post-refine, well, I still don't think he really impacted the meta, but he definitely improved a lot. Having half of NFU to guarantee his follow-up attack allows him to be a very powerful tank, and now with save skills, armors in general got a huge buff to protect their allies, and Ephraim is no exception. However, I don't think he's the best by any means. What makes him unique is the offensive half of NFU, which isn't really that valuable compared to a deny follow-up attack on the enemy, especially in something like Summoner's Duels, and that is basically all he has besides some healing. He faces a lot of competition from Gustav, Brave Edelgard, Valentine's Lucina, Brave Hector, Ascendant Idune, Fallen Rhea, Halloween Myrrh, yeah. I can go on. And as I mentioned before, in general, green is not a good color to be right now. But still, like, having an NFU in his weapon, combine that with something like Hardy Fighter, you can get full NFU that way, and not even speed-based, just straight up. And obviously, as an armor with the ability to use saves, he's still pretty strong in that role, and there may be some scenarios where you could justify using him. They're pretty niche though, so I would personally say that he is a B tier. Next, we have Brave Veronica, and Brave Veronica on release was by far the best CYL2 unit. A staff cav with a preference weapon, like, that doesn't happen that often. So, like, she immediately stood out, especially as a very offensive staff cav, and with the support that she can provide with her debuffs. And honestly, it was unparalleled at the time, I believe. Her Refine, while probably the most tame one of CYL2, still allows her to support her allies even further, and honestly, even now, she still ranks among the best staff cavs in the game. The only competition really is like Elise, or Young La Rochelle, maybe Maribel. Unfortunately, I don't think she is top tier anymore. Staff cavs in general have gotten a lot less important on AR defense, as the meta has shifted to more Catria balls for the optimal teams. This is mainly due to save units being extremely overpowered on offense, and obviously as a staff cav, Veronica does struggle a lot against that. And as I mentioned before, there is competition from Young La Rochelle, who can provide the flash, and Elise, who can provide the gravity. I do think in Chaos Season, cav lines have made somewhat of a return that can allow staff cavs to have a place, but saves these days are extremely strong, and unfortunately, Brave Veronica greatly struggles to have an impact against them. She doesn't really have the power to take those on effectively, and these days it is very important to have that offensive power, since you can't just snipe support units like Peony, for example. Obviously though, I still think she can have a place in like those like cav lines or more high threat range defenses. Like, those are definitely not like completely gone yet, and she definitely is very strong in that role. So honestly, I'd put her into a B tier. And now we move on to the CYL3 units. First on our list, we have Brave Alm. And honestly, Brave Alm has got to have one of the most insane 0 to hero arcs I've ever seen. Like, I initially put him in D tier, and as you recall, before his refine, I probably considered him the worst CYL unit overall, like in D tier. And I hoped that Alm would get an amazing refine, and boy, did IS actually delivered. Actually went from 0 to hero. With his refine and Shen scale, he is absolutely amazing. With the true damage, and basically always doubling thanks to getting half of NFU and the wind sweep effect, unless he gets outspeed, he will always get 2 hits with that true damage. And this is assuming he otherwise does 0 damage without the true damage. Like, he either deletes save armors or other tanky units, or leaves them in a state where others can pick them off. And the extra movement just gives him huge value in not only Ether 8's defense, but in Summoner's duels, where he is one of the best offensive melee reds there in the game. Windsweep provides a lot of value to be able to take on those raid bosses or front lines without getting any damage, and he has enough bulk and speed to effectively run Close Call very effectively, and with Time's Pulse can generally proc a 2-turn special on the second hit. Close Call, not only in addition to increasing his survivability after going in, it also allows him to like move back 1, and being able to retreat back 1 is extremely powerful in Summoner's duels, where you can retreat back 1 to the range of a Farsafe unit. Definitely S tier in my opinion. Not Brave Hector levels, but still very respectable in S. Next we have Brave Micaiah, and Brave Micaiah is pretty straightforward, to be honest, right? Like, she is a standard flying Micaiah with armor and cavalry effectiveness. She does have a guaranteed follow-up attack, which she got in her Refine. Before that, I'd say she did her job well, but with that, she just does it better. Guaranteed follow-up attack is really good, and I do think she is actually really good in Arena. She scores 185 BST with the dual skill and her preference B. Obviously, with the upcoming tier 4B skills, that is no longer unique, but she doesn't have to inherit some random chill skill from a special hero in order to get that. Obviously, having flyer mobility with the guidance provides a lot of mobility support and can even heal with her sacrifice, which is really huge in Arena where you don't generally have good healing options. That is the sort of niche scenario where she can excel at. In ARO though, again, green is kind of a rough color to be right now, and I personally think her OG version is a better option for most cases. You can use her in AR defense pretty effectively, but of course, units like Brave Hector and Ascended Idun can pose trouble thanks to that null armor effectiveness. And in Summoner's duels, I don't think she particularly has the range needed to be able to stand out. Again though, I do think she has some niche scenarios where she can be very effective, but it's definitely not as good as Alm, I would say. So I'd say she is in B tier. So the next unit we have on our list is none other than Brave Eliwood. He has Beast and Dragon effectiveness, which is what makes him unique. And with his Refine, he also gets half of no follow-up to ensure that he is able to double and get through those like Weary Fighter effects, and Spurn. So that does mean that he actually functions really well in the mixed phase role. And can definitely stand on his own with these effects. It's very similar to Brave Eirika in the sense, which we will get into, if you are able to inherit a Canto skill to him, like say SD Near Trace. Unfortunately, being a Cav, I really don't think he has the bulk to like fully commit to tanking, and I don't think you would want him to be a tank anyways, because like again, he is effective against beasts and dragons, and those are mainly enemy phase units. So he actually functions really well as a player phase unit in being able to bust down those bulky dragons. He does face competition from Brave Eirika, and the thing that he has over Brave Eirika is that Eliwood does have that dragon beast effectiveness. Eirika instead has armor and Cav effectiveness and Moonlight Bangle. So that's what really separates them. And Eliwood's Dragon and Beast effectiveness has actually gotten a lot of value these days with all the powerful Dragon and Beast units we've gotten, like, say, Ascended Idun, Fallen Rhea, Fallen Lilith, Medius, Legendary Myr, Asker, and upcoming is going to be Brave Tiki, presumably. So again, he has a lot of value. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a fixed Canto like Eirika has. He instead has the remaining +1, which I feel is not as consistent, especially in something like Summoner's duels, but still he is definitely a really good option, I would say. It's just unfortunate that Brave Eirika exists because Brave Eirika is overpowered. But still, that still warrants him an A, in my opinion. Next, we have Brave Camilla. And honestly, I think Brave Camilla is really underrated these days. That's probably due to her Refine being fairly straightforward, but in my opinion, it is very effective. Backing up a bit, first of all, having a preference staff and being a very offensive flying staff unit made her very potent. I think her only competition really is Scion Nana, or 12 Nana, if you're cool. But what makes Camilla unique and amazing is the gravity effect that she has in her preference weapon. And with the safety fence, gravity hit and run is a very powerful strategy. She's basically like a staff version of legendary Claude, albeit with less power, but in turn can be used in every season and has dazzling. Brave Camilla can be used in the same way, especially now that we have Return Plus as an ephemera option. So you no longer have to sacrifice a Sarah in order to get the strategy to work. You can just get it for free. And yeah, her Refine makes her able to do that and be even better. The debuffs really help her out and weakens the unit she hits. And of course, that also provides good support for any other members of the team as well. Gravity Hit and Run is really good. And honestly, if she had Kanto, that would just be like the last piece she needs to truly be S tier. Outside of that Gravity Hit and Run strategy, you can also run her now in ARD, since Catria Balls are becoming a lot more prevalent, and therefore the range restrictions she has as a flyer doesn't matter as much compared to like a Cav unit. And obviously, being paired with Catria does mean that her offensive gets even higher. And yeah, gravity on defense is also super strong. I mean, gravity in general is really strong and very underrated in my opinion as an effect. So I put her in A as well. And now we get into the CYL 4 units. Oh boy, I can't believe that in like a month, these 4 units will get refines before like OG Hector, I believe. That's kind of crazy to think about. But let's start with Brave Dimitri, and oh boy. I remember when Brave Dimitri was first revealed before we knew his stats, and everyone, including me honestly, was like freaking out and lavishing him praises. But obviously, it did not pan out, unfortunately. And he just has a lot of flaws, I think, that holds him back to being meta or relevant. So where to start? Well, first, 18 res. It's actually so atrocious. I know he does have that defense-based damage reduction, which we'll get into a bit. But still, just having 18 res really hurts his matchups, since he does have a DC weapon and is mainly meant to be an Omni tank. 18 res just doesn't cut it, to be perfectly honest, especially when we have units like Eitri or Ninjoran or Harmonic Sonia these days. Again, sure, he does have defense-based damage reduction, but the problem with defense-based damage reduction is that it's not as good as speed-based damage reduction. And the reason for that is because stacking defense is not as optimal as stacking speed. Why? Well, first off, stacking defense only helps with one part of the damage matchup. You don't exactly stack res, right? 2, stacking speed enables you to do 2 things, assuming you have speed-based damage reduction. 1, it makes your units more bulky because of that speed-based damage reduction. And 2, stacking speed prevents the enemies from naturally being able to double you, or if the enemy has no follow-up, just preventing that double due to a natural speed stack. That is why stacking speed is a lot more optimal than stacking defense, and so it's basically like a catch-22. You can either increase his bulk by stacking defense for that defense-based damage reduction, but then your speed really gets hurt and he won't be able to survive doubles, or you stack his speed, which obviously doesn't help with this defense-based damage reduction at all. And because this defense-based damage reduction is in his preference skill, he can't run no follow-up either, meaning he can't prevent units with auto follow-ups from just doubling him even if they're slow and bulky. So that is really unfortunate that he does not have no follow-up anywhere in his weapon. And also, the lack of slaying in his weapon means that you can't run 3-turn specials like Bonfire, which would have been really good in scaling with stacking defense, but because he can't run that and like consistently get Bonfire to get procced, you basically have to run 2-turn specials like Ruptured Sky or Moonbow or Noontime, I guess? So yeah, unfortunately, he doesn't really have a place anywhere. Granted, you still can make him work, but yeah, I think C tier is appropriate. Next, we have Brave Edelgard, and I don't think this will be controversial at all to state that she is definitely the longest lasting CYL4 unit when it comes to a meta perspective, and definitely the best aging unit of this CYL4 batch, in my personal opinion. She still is a very effective save armor, especially when you run her as a near save tank, very min-max, and has a very unique teleporting effect that basically gives her +1 movement and the orders effect. So she has like better movement than infantry units as an armor unit, which is kind of insane. The guaranteed follow-up attack on Black Eagle Rule is pretty good, and the damage reduction on the 80% on the follow-up attacks is just the icing on the cake. Unfortunately, the damage reduction is only on follow-up attacks, so it doesn't affect the second hit of Brave attacks, or just Brave attacks in general. So she is actually very susceptible to that and Bridal Catria, which is actually a huge problem because obviously Bridal Catria has taken over the meta by storm in both Ether Raids and Summoners duels. And she also still has armor weakness, which is very important considering that she absolutely gets demolished by Valentine's Crom. Like, there's just no question about it. Not only that, but also very weak to things like Brave Alm and Legendary Nana. Yeah, as I mentioned before, green is not a good color to be right now. Despite the min-maxing enabling her to be more bulky, it does also mean that she has low speed. And that definitely hurts her, since being speedy as an armor is definitely the way to go these days. As I mentioned before, it helps prevent doubles and helps you deal with things like Legendary Nana, right? Like, the reason why Legendary Nana is so good is because of her Desperation. Well, if you don't allow her to double through stacking speed, then she can't do Desperation, right? So, yeah, also she doesn't have a way to deny follow-up attacks like Brave Hector does, and she is very suboptimal as a Farsaver compared to Brave Hector or even Ascendant Idun, and being a near saver right now faces a lot of competition from things like Valentine's Gustav, Valentine's Lucina, Ardent even, and near save in general is also less important. Though again, like even with me saying all of that, I still think she is very good and very effective and still has that insane movement that can definitely help in modes where movement is very important, which is essentially every mode. So while definitely not the best, I still consider hers to still be very strong, and therefore will be putting her in A. And now we get to what I consider the tragic case of Brave Claude. I legitimately thought that when he released, Brave Claude would have aged the best with his healing, especially in Ether Raids where you can have like a huge buff to your HP. Brave Claude can be very bulky. The only way to stop him originally was basically guard effects or a wind sweep, but even then guard effects could be overcome with Brave Lucina, and nowadays with like supportive tempo effect like from Legendary Female Byleth. But unfortunately, there is one skill that completely shuts him down, and that is Fatal Smoke, at least for enemy phasing. Like, normally, one skill on one seasonal 5-star unit wouldn't be that damaging to unit viability, but unfortunately that happened to be on the most meta-influential single banner we've had in a long while. Of course, we're talking about Dual Leaf's banner with Dual Leaf, Valentine's Gustav, Valentine's Henriette, the other ones that don't really matter. But yeah, like that is the single most influential banner I think I've ever experienced in my time playing Fae. And yeah, Dual Leaf just completely shuts him down, and he was everywhere. And now also Legendary Sigurd is also everywhere with that Fatal Smoke. Besides Fatal Smoke, the damage output we've gotten these days, like the power of nukes, have gone so big that he is starting to get susceptible to just getting one-shotted. Or, like, alternatively, just getting two-shotted by Brave effects, especially with Brave Catria now getting a rise in popularity. And so, essentially, he doesn't really have a place anymore in really any mode. Like, how are you going to use him in Summoner's Duels, right? And you're not going to use him in Arena either, at least I don't think so. And AR has the problems that I mentioned above. I do think he's not, like, completely irredeemable, right? Like, you can definitely make him work very well. But unfortunately, again, this is a very tragic case of just one unit really putting him into the dumpster, and that is still unfortunate. So yeah, C tier. And the last of the CYL 4 units, we have Brave Lysithea. So Brave Lysithea is definitely not the most interesting unit, I'll be completely honest. I will say on her release, she was probably less consistent than her OG version, and her relying on just nuking really left her with not a place to use her. Winter Bernie, though, does help with that a little bit, although relying on a specific seasonal unit I don't think is ideal. The biggest problem with her is that she is extremely impractical to actually set up. Her weapon relies on her being below 100 HP, and in case you haven't forgotten, we all start battles with 100% HP, and she needs that in order to get her guaranteed desperation effect. And even besides that, Brave Lysithea, even with all the conditions active, is very basic and uninteresting. We have plenty of mage nukes in the game, right? And Brave Lysithea can't even do pre-charge specials or run AoE specials. She doesn't have any armor effectiveness like, say, OG Micaiah does, or any of the Micaiahs does. She only has cavalry effectiveness. And unfortunately, I also say that she doesn't really have a place right now. So probably just a C. And now we get into the final CYL batch. We have the CYL 5 units, starting with Gatekeeper. Oh, Gatekeeper. Definitely the character that got the most attention during the voting phase of CYL 5, and he is definitely the most niche, I would say, of the CYL 5 units. I said at the time when I was doing the tier list last year that he was still very unoptimized and had a lot of potential if we can figure out the right team, but unfortunately 1 year later that still has not materialized. And this is just mainly due to the current AR meta being so dominated by saves on offense, making Gatekeeper not that useful on ARD. And on ARO, I definitely don't think he's worth a team slot despite somewhat hindering Catria balls. But not really, you don't really need that. The main weakness is the lack of follow-up and very subpar killing power on any threat. He is also not that hard to take out either, it's actually very simple. And since his release, we've gotten 2 units that basically outclasses Gatekeeper in every single useful way. We've had Legendary Myr, who has his warp denial while actually being able to tank things and to kill things. And now we've got an Asker with that new B skill, giving that obstruct to others. The only thing that Gatekeeper fans are clinging to is his ability to run Canto control, or I guess infantry no follow-up, I guess. But like, please, for your own sake, do not fodder your Medius for Gatekeeper. Medius is just so much more useful at the time of recording in the competitive modes. And there are a lot better units that can use Canto control like Valentine's Crom. Still, that aspect, I think, prevents him from being in D tier. So, C. Yeah, congrats. And now we have the, in my opinion, probably the most underrated CYL 5 units. We have Brave Marianne, and I think Brave Marianne somehow got a really bad rap for whatever reason because she is stupid good. I've used her a lot in my Ether Raids clears if you've been following my channel for a while, and I genuinely do believe that if it wasn't for Summoner's Duels, she would be the best CYL 5 unit. Obviously, Summoner's Duels now exist, so she's now the second best, so I guess she just has to accept that. But the amount of flexibility and consistency that she provides is actually insane, and it's only really something that you can really appreciate once you actually use her in a Gale Force team. And like, I have a Brave Marianne that is completely unmerged, and she just provides so much flexibility. Using her, I don't even need to like calc things out when doing Gale Force plays with her, because I know that if I make a mistake, a Brave Marianne can easily allow me to recover from it thanks to her utility. And trust me, I've made plenty of mistakes when I'm using her. The thing that makes her really good is that she effectively trades up from 1 action to 2, and the only other units that can really do that while being like a refresher is either Dual Peony, Harmonized Dorothea, or Azura, which are affected by dual hindrances, and a Gale Force Dancer, which is way less consistent. It's sort of like the Pot of Greed card from Yu-Gi-Oh! The reason why it's banned is because getting 2 from 1 is super overpowered. Only Legendary, Fallen, and Summer Edelgard gets more, which are 3 to 1, but they're not quote-unquote dancers. I know some say that dual hindrances are not an issue for Gale Force for teams running like Dual Peony or Harmonic Azura, but it definitely can be if, say, you want to trap a dual harmonic unit, or like the defense runs like 4 duals or harmonics. Like, I've been using Gale Force for over a year now with Dual Peony and more recently Harmonic Azura, and I will be the first to say that it has mattered a lot in many maps that I have encountered. Brave Marianne does not have that issue. She provides that amazing flexibility to be able to execute your Gale Force strategy just with more options, right? Like, I've used Brave Marianne so much in my 11 actions teams in the past, and it's super ridiculous, but it's good. Anyways, getting her special to proc is super easy. Getting her to kill something when doing Gale Force is also super easy and consistent, and the gravity restriction in her special is generally such a non-issue. You have to remember that Gale Force plays generally are in very close quarters, so that restriction generally doesn't matter, or that Wings of Mercy isn't affected by the gravity restriction at all. So that restriction might as well not exist. So yeah, I do believe that she is extremely strong, easy S tier. If it wasn't for Summoner's Duels, I would say she was the best, but Summoner's Duels exists, so I guess she'll have to settle for second best. So after we had an amazing unique unit like Brave Marianne, we next have Brave Marth. Good old Marth. Red Sword Infantry Marth. Yeah, this is like the 4th Red Sword Infantry Marth we've gotten, I think, so definitely very sleeper when it comes to design-wise and creativity. And I definitely feel that out of all the CYL 5 units, Brave Marth is definitely the one I've seen the least. Now, thankfully, he isn't completely cookie cutter to all the other Red Sword Infantries that we've had. The thing that sets him apart is his Vantage effect, right? That's what makes him unique, because otherwise he would just be a Gen 6 Merida, essentially. And the build to basically take advantage of that Vantage effect would be a special Spiral build in order to ensure that Shining Emblem will always be procced when doing Vantage clears with him. Unfortunately, this Vantage effect does rely on him being within 2 spaces of an ally for that effect, which for Vantage is actually really restrictive and can leave the supporting unit vulnerable to getting sniped. Obviously, you can just protect with save, but at that point, why not just run a save ball, right? Vantage units tend to want to go very forward. Being able to, say, take out the Hari Bearing unit and then just sweep all the rest of the teams. I do think that right now, though, enemy phase strategies are completely dominated by saves. There really isn't a reason to run anything else like Omni Tank or Vantage. Like, saves is just that busted. If we can have some sort of save counterplay IS, that would be greatly appreciated. Unfortunately, that does mean that Marth does struggle to find a place. And he's very subpar in Summoner's Duels, right? Especially when it compared to Legendary Marth. And you really can't use him in something like Arena or Ether Raid's defense. ARO, he actually gotten some more value with Chaos Season, where Vantage is more strong there, and you can't run just a save ball due to that limitation on save skills. So definitely not bottom tier or C tier in my opinion, but still, I do think Brave Marth can struggle, but there are niche scenarios like I mentioned before that can definitely make him work very well, and so I'll just put him in B tier. And last but certainly not least, we have Brave Eirika. And I mean, what do I need to say about her? She is by far the best Lance Cavalry unit we have in the game right now, and definitely the best CYL 5 unit in my personal opinion. Definitely the generalist of the batch, being able to run many things from hit and run to Gale Force to just being a very powerful nuke. Moonlight Bangle having no guard, Kanto, and the additional Luna-like effect is kind of ridiculous, and that's on top of her having damage reduction and half of no follow-up in her weapon. She is a monster, being able to go in, take out a unit, and go out, especially with that cavalry and armor effectiveness, which is very present in today's metagame. In Ether Raids, she can do Gale Force, she can do hit and run, and thanks to the slaying effect in her weapon and guard, she can do those very effectively, and Kanto can also help trap units as well. In Summoner's Duels, she is the benchmark for all offensive units, or offensive melee units. She is still top tier to this day, and Kanto 2 is extremely good to be able to pick off your opponents, and Moonlight Bangle allows her to cut through a lot of the bulky front lines and save armors. Obviously, armors with no armor effectiveness like Brave Hector or Ascendant Idun exists and can make her struggle, but there are ways to support her to take out those threats. She is extremely versatile and definitely S tier. Like, I don't think this will be controversial at all. She is just really strong, and I don't think she will fall off in at least the near future. So yeah. So yeah, this is the tier list that I have for my personal ranking of the Brave units. Obviously, this is my opinion. I did try to keep it as fair as possible using the criteria I mentioned before, and taking into account modes like Arena, Ether Raid's offense, Ether Raid's defense, and Summoner's Duels. And yeah, if you have any other opinions or want to know what I got right or what I got wrong, most likely, let me know down in the comments below. And overall, I do think that the Brave units are always going to have some sort of place. Will be very interesting to see what CYL 6 brings us in store, and of course the CYL 4 refines I'm most excited for, because I do have a Brave Edelgard that I would like to use a lot more. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that jazz to help support the channel. It only takes 5 seconds to subscribe, but it truly does help out this channel a lot, and I really do appreciate all the constant support. And again, let me know what your rankings will be down in the comments down below, and see you all next time. Thank you, everyone!